So like I said, what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to identify, for example, the first letter, or the first paragraph, or the first block, or maybe based on something being highlighted. That is where pseudo classes and pseudo elements come into play. Now, the difference between a pseudo class and a pseudo element is very subtle, syntax, and both just sort of semantically, technically. That a pseudo class is going to apply to an entire element. And that's based on where that element is, or based on the current state. So if somebody has put their mouse over it, if somebody has highlighted it, actually highlighted isn't right, but if somebody's put their mouse over it, if it's at the top, if it's at the bottom, if it's the last item, if it's an odd item, if it's an even item, etc., all of that is where pseudo classes come into play. So rather than me explicitly having to say dot and then the name of a class, and then inside of HTML saying class equals, it's going to be based on something about that element. So for example, it might be the first item in the hierarchy. So maybe we want to bump up the font size just a little bit on the first paragraph, and then a slightly smaller font on everything else. Or maybe for the last item, that we know the last item that's going to be down at the very bottom, it's going to be inside of a div tag, but we know that that's where our copyright is going to be, so maybe we want to make that smaller. Then we can go in and do that. Or maybe we want to apply a style if it happens to be the only child. So maybe this is a search results page, and what we want to display is, sorry, no results found, and we want that to appear with a particular type of font. We can do all of that with pseudo classes. So pseudo classes are all based on something about that element, based on where it is or based on what's going on. So it could be based on position. So first child, last child, the nth child inside of its particular parent. By the way, the nth child, you will notice, will actually take a number, or you can also use the text odd and even. Now, for anybody who's been programming HTML for a little while, you're probably all familiar with having to go in and try to set something up for that, you know, that differentiating for odd or for even. There, problem solved. Odd, even, done. So much easier. Okay, and then you'll also notice that we've got position and type. And this one really, I think, is subtle. I don't want to use the word confusing. But it definitely is subtle. And here's the way that this is going to work. Let me, there we go, do this. Let's say I said div colon first of type, and then I set, you know, whatever my style happened to be, and then let's up here say that I said div and I said first child like this. There we go. All right. So what's the difference between me saying first child and me saying first of type? It's a great question. And the answer is that first of type is going to be based on where that div tag is on the entire page. So it's the absolute first div tag. Contrast that with first child. First child is going to be based on its parent container. And let's do this. Let's go back into Visual Studio here. I think this is going to be sort of an easier way to drill into this. So let's open up my couple little sections here, and we'll leave it like this. Okay. So what I want you to notice is there is my little section in a div tag, and there is my little section in a div tag. Now, in both of these cases here, these both are first child. The reason that they're both first child is because they're both the first child of that section element. So they're the first div tag inside of that section. So if I wanted to do something with the first paragraph in each section, I can now do that. But this one right here also happens to be the first of type. Why? Because it's the first div tag that appears anywhere on my page. So first child, based on the parent, first of type, first time that that thing appears anywhere. Now, for me, in my personal experience, I generally don't find myself using first of type all that often, but I do find myself using last of type periodically. And again, it's for that little section down at the very bottom. So that way, if you've got, you know, all of your little links about, you know, now hiring and about us and the copyright and all of that, and that's contained inside of a div, and you know that that's always going to be at the end, that's perfect. That way you can just simply say last of type, and I know that that's always going to be the case. In fact, here, let's just go in and we'll add that right in. Let me just add in a div right down here, and now hiring. And whatever it is that we want to do. Okay, so let's go in and style all of that. So here's what I want to do, is I want to bump up the font size just a little bit of the initial paragraphs, and I want to make that bottom section, let's just say red, just to kind of make it very, very obvious there. Okay, and let me also, I'm just going to say font size, and I'm going to say 16 pixels. And let me see, how's that going to look here? Okay, that's perfect actually. Excellent. All right. So now let me go in and I want to grab first paragraph of each section. And if you remember, our paragraphs are currently set up as div tags. Okay. So I'm going to say div, colon, and then you'll notice I've got first child. And then I can just say curly brace, and now I can say font size, and let's go ahead and make that 20 pixels, which is probably bigger than we would really want it, but I'm trying to make it really obvious here. So first child, and now let's come back over here, let's hit refresh, and now you'll notice that's nice and big, and let's scroll down, there's our second paragraph, our third paragraph, our fourth paragraph, and our fifth paragraph in that section. And then you'll notice once again, big. Now let me update the text. I think that's also going to make it a little bit more obvious here. So let's just go in and say first in section, scroll on down, and first in section. And now let's come back over here, hit refresh, and then you'll notice that that one is nice and big. Scroll on down, small, 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 and then again, nice and big. You're looking at me like you have a question.
Could you scroll up in the code? Why is it that, so what is the first child of div?
Okay, so that's a great question, because that's sort of the way that it reads, that it looks like it's saying, I'm looking for the first child of the div tag, but it's not. So what a pseudo class or pseudo element applies to is to the tag in question. So I'm not looking for a child of div. I'm looking for div, and I'm trying to see what it's a child of. So that's a great question, because when you look at it, and I did that too when I first looked at this, when I was first learning this, is that I looked at that and I said, wait a minute, is this looking for the first child inside of div? It's not. It's looking at the div tag and looking at the structure of the div tag. So it's not looking at the contents of the div tag, it's looking at the div tag itself and seeing, is it the first child of something? So great question, great question. Okay, now let's also go in and say div, and I'm going to say last of type, and then let's just go in and say color colon blue, and let's say font size, and let's make that 12 pixels. Okay, and now let's again come back, hit refresh, and now what you're going to notice, you weren't supposed to do that. Ha! You're not supposed to do it that way. All right, in any event, it's actually putting it on the section, which it's not supposed to do. It's supposed to be on the page itself. So this is just sort of making a liar out of me. See, we're really cooking on the show. Live demos. Live demos right here in front of you.
We told you guys CSS is finicky, and this is one of the cases.
Exactly. All right. So in any event, so last of type is supposed to be the last of that item. I'm just going to make that go away for right now. That's really weird. I'll have to go back and work with that later. We're really cooking here. All right. In any event, so what I want you to notice, just to kind of review this, is that this allows me to, again, based on the document structure, do something different with it, which is cool. Now, I did one little thing inside of my Visual Studio here, and that is I hit Control-K, Control-D. Two-part shortcut, Control-K, Control-D, which formats the document. One of the things that you're going to notice about CSS is that this is going to get very big very quickly. And so formatting becomes a very important component. And so you'll notice there's my div, and then there is a pseudo class for div. And so you'll notice that that is tabbed in, and that is a best practice. So whatever you want globally, and then all of the pseudos you're going to want tabbed in. Okay. Cool, cool, cool. Back to slides. There we go. Now, how about, rather than based on document structure, how about element state, based on what's going on? So maybe we want something to look different if you've clicked on it. Then maybe we want to bold it, like a checkbox. Or maybe if you hover over something, then we want to put the underline back onto it. Because if I go back to my page here, and let's just go all the way back up to the very top, we're going to notice there's our nav section. Okay, that's all, peachy keen, hunky-dory. But, it still would be really, really nice if we could make that more obvious, that that's a link. So when you put your mouse over it, it'd be nice to see an underline, don't you think?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, sure enough, we can do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say nav a colon and then hover. Hover, of course, just like the JavaScript. You hover over something. That's going to be when the mouse is over it. And then let's go ahead and say text decoration, and let's say underline. Cool. Save. Let's come back over here. Let's hit refresh. And now you're going to notice when I put my mouse over it that sure enough, we get those little underlines. So now I can clearly say, oh, look, okay, that is, in fact, a link. Cool. Now, let's come back over here real quick. And I want to highlight one other thing. So again, you're going to notice that the syntax colon in my pseudo class there. But you are going to notice that I can still go in and use everything else that I've used. So if you remember, that space, of course, means contained inside of an element. So this is now going to say that this is only going to apply to an anchor tag when somebody mouses over it, and that anchor tag is inside of a nav section. So you can get as explicit as you want when going in and defining those elements and how you want everything to look inside of a page. Cool.